Welcome to the Deep Dive, your express route to being truly well-informed. Today, we're embarking on an exploration of a topic that might seem, pretty straightforward, accessibility and disability. But trust me, our sources reveal layers of insight that are far deeper and more surprising than you might expect. This deep dive comes from an incredibly candid conversation with an individual living a vibrant life despite, well, significant physical challenges. Our mission is really to dismantle common assumptions and uncover what true inclusivity actually looks like in practice.
Exactly. And this isn't just about understanding one person's unique journey, though that's powerful in itself. By examining these experiences, we can start to recognize universal patterns and connect the dots. It reveals some profound truths about how our society is currently designed and, maybe more critically, for whom it truly serves.
So we're asking the core question today. What does it truly mean to design a world for everyone? And how much further do we really need to go?
Okay, let's unpack this. As that unpacking disability. Beyond the visible and expected. When many of us hear visual impairment, I think our minds often jump straight to total blindness. But our sources clearly illustrate that the definition is, well, remarkably broader than that.
That's a really crucial distinction. Yeah, visual impairment isn't just about, complete darkness. It includes a whole spectrum of conditions, like correctable vision that's still below zero point 0.3. Which means even with glasses, someone's sight might be so impaired that reading street signs or recognizing faces from a distance becomes incredibly difficult. It also covers things like a narrow field of vision or even blurred vision from something like cataracts. For instance, our source talked about someone whose left eye is only 0.2 and their right eye can only see clearly up to about 30 centimeters. Yet this person wears glasses, and to an outside observer, they might not look disabled at all. And I imagine that's precisely where the friction often kicks in, isn't it? These sort of invisible challenges. They can lead to unfair judgments. Like you said, someone being questioned for simply using priority seating on the bus or train just because they don't fit some narrow preconceived idea of what disabled looks like. How does that play out day to day?
It creates a lot of misunderstanding, definitely. And this brings us to a really powerful concept highlighted by our source. We are all candidates for disability. It emphasizes that everyone, really everyone, at some point in their lives might experience a temporary or maybe a situational disability.
Yeah, we heard some truly compelling stories that really drive this point home. Think about, say, a mother recovering from cataract surgery. Suddenly, she's effectively confined to her home because she's afraid of collisions and, well, can't find seating on public transport. Or consider this really eye-opening scenario our source mentioned. A totally able-bodied person who, after running an intense marathon, found it nearly impossible to walk, or even use a squat toilet. And they actually needed help from someone who is visually impaired.
Right. And if we expand on that, the statistics from our source really underscore this. While maybe 1.2 million people in Taiwan hold official disability certificates, there's roughly 3 times that number experiencing conditions that need similar accommodations. But they often remain, overlooked by the system. This leads us to another critical idea, implicit discrimination, or Yu Wei, as a university professor termed it. It describes these subtle, often totally unconscious biases that, while they might seem minor on the surface, can cause significant distress, and they erect real barriers for people with special needs.
The examples we heard really illustrate this vividly. An individual, a graduate of NTU's sociology department no less, being asked if they only got into university via bonus points. Or that constant unsolicited advice about transport, oh, why don't you just take the disabled-friendly bus? Might not be intentionally mean, but it's just deeply dismissive, isn't it? Dismissive of their autonomy and often the practical realities they face. 2, navigating the world. Practical challenges and creative solutions. That brings us right to the reality of those disabled-friendly buses, often called Fukang buses locally. There's this common assumption that these specialized services are the main solution, maybe even the ideal one for people with mobility challenges, but our source reveals a, pretty surprising reality about how they actually work day to day.
Yeah, a key insight here is that these buses operate much more like a specialized taxi service than a real public transport option.
Yeah.
They're extremely limited in number, first off. And crucially, they require booking 5 days in advance for what are called special A-grade users.
5 days? What?
Yeah, which makes any kind of spontaneous travel like deciding to meet a friend for dinner or going to an impromptu event absolutely impossible.
It's like our source put it with that perfect analogy. Imagine if everyone was told to only take taxis instead of the MRT or public buses. It just doesn't stack up as a primary way for people to get around.
Exactly. And this raises a really crucial question. Why aren't all public transportation systems truly accessible? The genuine need is for more buses with low floors and ramps, more MRT stations with reliable elevators, all integrated seamlessly into the general network, not just relying solely on these specialized, limited services. And while things are improving, there's still sometimes the issue of drivers being maybe reluctant to use the wheelchair floor locks because it takes a bit of extra time.
Okay, moving beyond ground transport, let's look higher, literally. Air travel, that might seem relatively standardized, maybe. But I imagine it presents its own unique set of hurdles.
It certainly does, yeah. First, you have to apply for wheelchair assistance directly with the airline, often well in advance. Then, once you're at the gate, you usually need to transfer from your own wheelchair to a special narrow one, just designed to get down the airplane aisles. And for people with electric wheelchairs, it gets even trickier.
Yeah.
There are really strict rules about battery specifications, the wattage, the capacity. Some types of batteries are just completely prohibited. And a particularly interesting point from our source was about getting seats next to caregivers. While some, maybe more traditional airlines, might require a lot of pushing and arguing, often citing safety concerns about help with oxygen masks or meals.
Right.
Newer airlines seem to be setting a much better example, being more accommodating, letting companions choose adjacent seats directly.
So it's about reasonable differential treatment, not demanding some kind of special privilege. It's about ensuring safety and practical support. That's a key distinction we heard.
Precisely. And sort of in the same vein, they mentioned sometimes asking to use the business class restrooms. Not for luxury, obviously, but simply because they offer that larger, more accessible space that's genuinely needed.
Okay, moving on to hotel stays, a pretty common part of travel. What are the specific needs when it comes to barrier-free rooms? It sounds like it's maybe not always as straightforward as just seeing that label.
That's right. There are actually two main types you need to know about. There are hearing-accessible rooms, which have light signals for things like alarms and doorbells. And then there are wheelchair-accessible rooms for mobility. But even within wheelchair-accessible rooms, there's a really critical difference. You often truly need what's called a rolling shower, where a wheelchair can physically enter the shower area. A room that only has a bathtub is often completely unusable for someone who can't transfer easily from their chair. Though it's good to know that shower chairs, sometimes people call them bureau chairs locally, maybe referring to a specific type, are usually available if you ask.
Huh. And our source shared that anecdote that really hits home the universal benefit here. Even an able-bodied person used a shower chair after running a marathon just because they were too exhausted to stand.
Exactly. And that connects to a broader point. Similar to the issue with squat toilets, they are just completely unusable for many people, including those with even temporary mobility issues, like you mentioned experiencing after your marathon.
Right. And it's not just squat toilets, is it? The danger of slippery bathroom floors, even in really high-end hotels, that's a huge concern, especially thinking about Taiwan's rapidly aging society. What is it, 1 in 5 people now over 65? It's a massive safety issue for a huge part of the population, not just those with official disabilities.
Which makes the call for B&Bs and hotels to proactively adopt universal design principles even more urgent. As our source kept reminding us, you really don't know when you might need accessible facilities yourself. 3. The joy of live events. A battle for equal access.
Okay, shifting gears a bit to leisure activities. I have to admit, I was genuinely surprised to learn that someone with both visual and mobility challenges would attend something like a Major League Baseball game in the U.S. How is that even possible to really fully enjoy?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible. And our source confirmed they'd been to 2 MLB games, stateside Oakland A's versus Seattle Mariners back in 2015, and then a Dodgers game more recently in 2024. The key insight here is that visual impairment doesn't stop the enjoyment. The focus shifts. It becomes about soaking in the incredible atmosphere, the roar of the crowd, the energy in the stadium. It's palpable. Plus, you can use your phone to follow the live broadcast, kind of like listening to games on the radio back in the day, getting immersed in the play-by-play that way.
And of course, you can't forget the stadium experience essentials, the hot dogs and popcorn.
Exactly. And a really major takeaway here was the U.S. ticketing system. While there aren't special discounts for people with disabilities, their online platforms are apparently exceptionally well designed. You can just check a wheelchair user box, and then you're shown multiple accessible seats, usually like 3 or 4 options available at every single price point.
Wow, okay. That feels like a crucial area for Taiwan to learn from. Ensuring accessible seating isn't just an afterthought, but available across all price levels for sports events. That seems fundamental for true inclusion.
Totally. And the accessibility apparently extends throughout the whole stadium experience. Accessible pathways, restrooms conveniently located right near the seating areas with absolutely no stairs to worry about, which they noted is quite a contrast to challenges sometimes faced in other places, like maybe Japan, where the logistical support might be a bit less seamless.
Okay, so from the ballpark to the concert hall, concerts are just as popular, maybe even more so for some. What kind of challenges have been faced navigating the concert scene here in Taiwan?
Well, our source has quite a rich history of concert going, including big names like Amuro Nami, Wu Bai, Lala Su, Ameo. Okay, hold on. The Amuro Nami concert, I am just ridiculously envious right now.
I know, right? Fair enough.
Okay.
But the evolution of concert ticketing for people with disabilities in Taiwan is actually quite telling. Back in the day, say around the Li Zongsheng concert era, it involved faxing application forms plus copies of disability certificates. It was incredibly slow, apparently, because the fax lines were always busy. But it sort of inadvertently created this weird advantage for really persistent people who could basically monopolize the fax machine. Now, the current system, which is aided by Cultural Ministry subsidies, has moved online. It uses real name authentication linked directly to disability certificates.
Okay, so with this presumably more equal and digital system, what's been the practical impact? How easy is it to actually get tickets now?
Well, here's the surprising part. It's actually become harder to get tickets. The sheer speed you need for online purchasing means they've missed out on recent concerts by artists like Li Yijun, Joaquin Chow, Della Ding. Really?
Yeah. So in a strange twist, it almost feels like a kind of privilege has been lost. Because the old system, even though it was clunky, offered a different kind of access for those who were persistent. And this also shines a light on the limitations of accessible seating in Taiwan. It seems only the really major venues, like Taipei Arena and Kaohsiung Arena, consistently offer proper dedicated wheelchair seats. Other venues often just use movable chairs. And even if you arrive early, wheelchair users sometimes get put right at the very back, which makes it hard to see, obviously, and often means you have to really assert your rights. And standing-only concerts, they're particularly problematic. It's basically impossible to see the stage. You end up quite literally just seeing people's butts, as our source put it.
Yeah.
It really highlights the need for venues to think about designing elevated platforms so wheelchair users can actually see overstanding crowds.
What about the cost side of things? Ticket pricing for accessible seats.
So the current system in Taiwan often involves half-price tickets for the person with a disability, and that usually includes a caregiver too. And our source argued this is actually quite justifiable when you think about it, because the caregiver adds an extra cost. It effectively doubles the price for one person's experience, whether it's going to KTV, the movies, or a concert. But this leads to a really interesting proposal. Why not think about a future system that maybe separates the pricing? You could have full-price accessible tickets for those who don't actually need a caregiver, or even for individuals experiencing those temporary disabilities we talked about, like someone recovering after that marathon. This could potentially open up more seating options for a wider range of needs. Because the current rigid system, forcing this choice between wheelchair seats and just general disability seats, is incredibly unhelpful. Disability, as we've discussed, is fluid, right? Someone might use crutches one day, be able to stand for a short while another day, or need a wheelchair on a different day entirely. This lack of flexibility in the ticketing just doesn't reflect the varying realities people live with. Outro. Ultimately, I think the core thread running through all these different experiences points to one vital lesson. Universal design. It truly benefits everyone. It goes far beyond just those who hold an official disability certificate.
That's such a profound point. And, thinking about Taiwan becoming a super aging society so quickly, many, many more people are going to experience mobility challenges in the future. As our source so powerfully put it, you really just don't know when you might need accessible facilities yourself. And it really highlights the incredible importance of advocates like the individual we discussed today, people who actively pursue their dreams, pursue their rights. In doing so, they're effectively stress testing our society, aren't they?
Yeah.
Exposing the areas where our infrastructure and attitudes fall short and pushing for that necessary change.
Exactly. And we really hope that these kinds of discussions will help raise awareness and, keep pushing for continued progress towards a genuinely more inclusive world.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. What if, By truly tackling these accessibility challenges now, we're not just creating a more inclusive society for other people, but we're actually ensuring a better, more accessible future for our own older selves, something to think about. And maybe consider how you, in your own way, might contribute to creating a more universally designed world.